It's funny. Uh, the holidays are supposed to be about togetherness, right? But sometimes it can actually make you feel even more alone. And that's what we're diving into today. Some fascinating ideas that might totally change how you think about connection. We're going to be looking at the work of a spiritual teacher, Neville Goddard, as explained by Susan Caroline.
What's really interesting here is that the source of our loneliness may not be external. It might actually be a case of forgetting something essential about who we really are.
Okay, I am so intrigued. Like, where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, Caroline, she actually starts with a story about her childhood. She was walking through the English countryside, and she had this distinct feeling of another presence with her, almost like someone was looking through her eyes. She talks about the comfort and the sense of never being truly alone that came with this experience.
Wow, that's a really powerful image. It sounds like she's describing something beyond just like a feeling, almost like a different way of actually experiencing reality.
Exactly. And this ties into Neville Goddard's concept of the other self, which he describes in his book, The Power of Awareness. It's not about having a separate twin or anything like that. It's more about recognizing the consciousness of the creator within each of us.
So rather than like looking for connection outside of ourselves,
Yeah.
we already have this source of connection within. Kind of sounds like a built-in antidote to loneliness.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. But Goddard emphasizes that this isn't just about intellectual understanding, it's more of an experiential knowing, something you feel and live, not just something you think about.
Okay, so how do we move from just like understanding this as a concept to actually experiencing this connection? How do we tap into that other self?
Well, Caroline suggests that we start by quieting our minds. She points out that we often try to fill every single moment with distractions,
Yeah.
busyness, anything to avoid being alone with our thoughts. What if that stillness is exactly where we need to go to find this connection?
That is a really interesting idea. It's almost like we're running from the very thing that could bring us that sense of peace and connection that we're looking for.
Precisely. And quieting the mind doesn't mean emptying it completely. It's more about creating space for something deeper to emerge.
So, like, practically speaking, what would that look like? How do we actually quiet our minds in a world that just seemed to constantly demand our attention?
Well, there are a lot of different practices that can help. Things like meditation or just spending time in nature, even just taking a few conscious breaths can make a big difference. The key is to become aware of that constant chatter that's going on in our minds and just gently shift our focus to the present moment.
I'm starting to see how this connects back to Caroline's story. By being fully present in that moment walking through the countryside, perhaps she was able to tune into a deeper level of awareness, a connection to something beyond herself.
That's a great insight. And it's in those moments of presence that we can begin to experience this other self, this divine presence within. It's not about achieving some kind of mystical state, but rather about cultivating a sense of inner stillness and awareness in our everyday lives.
This is starting to feel really practical.
Yeah,
It's not about becoming like a totally different person, but rather about shifting our focus and attention. So if we want to experience this sense of connection, we need to start by creating space for it, quieting the mind and just becoming more present.
exactly. And once we start to do that, we might be surprised by what we discover. We might start to feel a sense of peace and wholeness that we never even knew was possible.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about. It sounds like this idea of the other self and the divine within could be a really powerful antidote to that feeling of loneliness, especially during the holidays.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're not alone, even when it feels like we are. There's a deeper connection available to us, and it starts with turning inward.
I'm definitely curious to explore this further. What are some of the implications of this concept for our lives, our relationships, and maybe even our sense of purpose? We'll delve into all that after a quick. So we were talking about quieting the mind right and becoming more present as ways to access this other self, this divine presence inside of us. The Goddard and Caroline were talking about, it reminds me of that saying, um, the kingdom of heaven is within.
Oh, that's a great connection. That phrase from Christian theology points to the same idea that each of us carries the divine within us. We are, in a sense, a temple of the Holy Spirit.
So we're like inherently connected to something so much greater than ourselves. It's not about finding God out there somewhere, but recognizing that presence within.
Exactly. And recognizing that presence can be really transformative. Carolyn uses really interesting analogy to try to explain the difference between intellectually understanding this concept and actually experiencing it. She compares it to trying to describe an orange to someone who's never tasted one. You can talk about the color, the texture, the smell, but until they actually take a bite, they haven't really grasped what an orange is.
That's a perfect analogy. Yeah, I can read everything there is to know about oranges.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be the same as experiencing that taste for myself, that juiciness.
Exactly. And it's the same with this concept of the other self. We can read Goddard's work, we can understand the ideas, but until we experience that connection for ourselves, it just remains theoretical.
So how do we move beyond just the theory?
Hmm.
What does it actually look like to experience that divine presence within?
It's not about like following a set of rules or techniques. It's more about cultivating this attitude of openness,
Hmm.
receptivity. Think about moments when you felt a sense of awe or wonder. Maybe watching a sunset or listening to a piece of music that really moves you, or simply being present with someone you love.
Those moments where you just feel connected to something bigger than yourself, almost like time stops,
Yeah.
and you're completely absorbed in that experience.
Yes. Those moments are glimpses of what we're talking about. And they're not just like random occurrences. They're reflections of this deeper reality, this connection to the divine that's always present, just waiting to be acknowledged.
So it's not about creating something new, but more about tuning into something that's already there.
That's right. And the more we cultivate those moments of awe and wonder, the more we open ourselves up to the awareness of this divine presence within us. It's like we're strengthening a muscle. With practice, it just becomes easier to access that state of connection.
This is shifting my whole perspective on loneliness. It's almost like we've been searching for the answer in all the wrong places, seeking external validation and connection when the truest form of connection is already inside of us.
And when we realize that, when we actually start to live from that place of knowing, then loneliness loses its grip on us.
It's empowering to think that we have this capacity within us to connect with something much larger than ourselves, a source of love and presence that's always available. It seems like that could change everything.
It certainly can, and it's a journey of self-discovery that's available to each of us. It's about remembering who we truly are, beings connected to a source of infinite love and wisdom.
This is all incredibly powerful and insightful. We've covered so much ground from that feeling of loneliness, especially during the holidays, to this idea of the other self and the kingdom of heaven within. What I'm really curious about now are the practical implications of all of this. How can we actually use this knowledge to live richer, more fulfilling lives? Let's explore that further. Okay, so we've been talking about this really profound idea that the key to overcoming loneliness might not be about finding more people to connect with, but rather about connecting with this divine presence that's already within us. Like remembering who we truly are.
Yeah, and it's in that remembering, in that recognition of our true nature, that we can actually experience this level of connection and fulfillment that goes way beyond anything the external world can offer us.
So, like if we're feeling lonely, instead of, reaching for our phones or scrolling through social media, we can turn inward and try to connect with that source of love and presence that's always with us.
Exactly. And it doesn't require hours of meditation or these complicated rituals. Even just small, simple practices can make a big difference.
Like what? What are some things that we can actually do in our daily lives to try to cultivate this sense of interconnection?
Well, Carolyn talks about the power of nature. Spending time outdoors, even just a short walk in the park, can help us shift out of our busy minds and into the present moment. Notice the trees, the sky, the feeling of the sun on your skin. Just allow yourself to be fully present with the natural world.
It's like hitting the reset button. Nature just has a way of bringing us back to ourselves.
It really does. And another really powerful practice is gratitude. Taking just a few moments each day to reflect on the things we're grateful for, no matter how small. It can shift our entire perspective.
Instead of focusing on what we lack, we're focusing on what we have.
Precisely. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You can simply write down 3 things that you're grateful for every day. Or just take a moment to appreciate the simple things. A warm cup of tea, or a comfortable bed, or a kind word from a friend.
It sounds like the key is to be really intentional about cultivating these moments of presence, gratitude, and connection. Whether it's through spending time in nature or practicing gratitude or simply taking a few conscious breaths throughout the day.
Yeah, and as we weave these practices into our lives, we start to strengthen that connection to the divine within. It's like we're building a bridge back to our true selves.
And as we do that, the feeling of loneliness starts to loosen its grip. And we discover a sense of wholeness and peace that's independent of our external circumstances. So what does this all mean for you? If you're struggling with loneliness, perhaps this is an invitation to shift your focus inward. Remember that divine presence that is within you. Cultivate those moments of stillness and gratitude. and connect with the natural world around you. You might just discover that the cure for loneliness isn't out there somewhere, but is within you all along. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.